I think humor is hugely underrated. I don't understand why it's so hard for funny films to win Oscars. With a really good funny film, you get all the stuff that you get in a really good film, plus humor. It's like, you get like 33% extra.
Welcome to the Humourology Podcast with me, Paul Barros. This is where we put the fun into business fundamentals. My guest on this edition of the Humourology Podcast is a renowned music journalist and author who has been a significant voice in the music industry for decades. Formerly the Times' chief rock critic, he has penned articles for some of the most respected publications in the world, including Melody Maker, Time Out, The Guardian, Mojo and Q. Starting his career with a fanzine that caught the attention of Melody Maker in 1991, he has since interviewed legendary artists such as Paul McCartney, ABBA, Radiohead, David Bowie, Neil Diamond, Beyonce, Coldplay and Sting. Known for his unique ability to capture the essence of music and its impact on culture, he has also produced and presented notable radio series for BBC Radio 4, including Lost Albums and Greek Blues. His acclaimed memoir, Broken Greek, intertwines his personal story with his love for music, earning praise and a prestigious literary award. When it comes to understanding and articulating the power of music, no one does it better than this week's guest. Pete Paphides, welcome to the Humourology Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. I've been a fan for years, and your writings have really, made me think, but probably more importantly for the Humourology Podcast, made me laugh, which is a beautiful thing to be able to do to a reader. Let's go back to the beginning. You grew up in a Cypriot Greek family in Birmingham, where your parents ran a fish and chip shop. Was humour valued in your family?
Was it valued? Not exceptionally so, I would say. It felt like quite a serious household to be growing up in. But then my parents were, they had their struggles. They came over from Greece and Cyprus, and they ended up running a chip shop, which wasn't really what they came here to do. And so there was a lot of homesickness, and the humor that came through into our house was probably came from outside. So it came from sort of things that we picked up on the television. I'll tell you what, the first time I remember like my dad finding something really, really funny, and it sort of stuck with me, and I mentioned it in the book as well, was when was the sitcom Mind Your Language. Do you remember that?
I do remember it. I remember reading it about it in the book as well, and your astonishment that your father was actually baying with laughter because there was somebody Greek in it. Was that right?
Yeah, I think it was just this sense that the fact that there was some kind of representation, which was a bit of a novelty, because you didn't necessarily expect at that time to see a Greek person depicted in a sitcom. And now I find it funny that he found it funny, because obviously when people do those anthologies when you have those anthologies on television about the worst sitcoms ever, the worst program, Mind Your Language, the sort of crude depictions of nationalities. So each character had one trait which was supposed to be synonymous with their where they came from. Everybody from that country was supposed to be like that. But I sort of, it's so crude now that I kind of find it, when I watch those clips back, I sort of kind of find it, because it's so in your face that you could have. It's unlike the sort of the sort of racism of that expresses itself these days, which is sort of implication, insinuation, and dog whistling. This just seemed like cartoon. This almost seemed like a Vic and Bob sketch now, by comparison. I just remember seeing this ridiculous sort of dialogue between the Greek guy and the Italian guy. Mind Your Language was supposed to be sort of fighting over this beautiful French woman. I mean, it's like a cartoon, really. Now it's it's so unsophisticated. It's funny to talk about, use the word sophistication, when you're talking about sort of crude depictions of people from other countries. But it's kind of dangerous now because it's never says outright what it is. So we're very much in this sort of dog whistle era.
There is that othering thing. I mean, I was interested. The first thing I'd say to our listeners is go out and buy Broken Greek. It's one of the greatest books I've read. It honestly is. It's so moving, and so now partly because I was obsessed like you with music as a child, but partly because it's so honest. And I was fascinated reading your book that you were an elective mute at school and sort of developed phobias. In retrospect, did deciding to be an elective mute give you the power to listen more?
It gave you the power to listen. It also gave you another power. I think, looking back now, I think it gave me control. Control is a bit like power. It overlaps with power.
Sure.
But I think looking back now, not that I could have analysed it this way at the time, but looking back, I had a life that I didn't really feel I was very much in control of, and I lacked that very much. And so I think that was it gave me a certain amount of that. I think I was a bit of a control freak, and so and phobias and aversions give you an outlet for that in a way. I was quite scared of the world, quite scared of I felt a lot of uncertainty. My parents had been planning to move back to sort of Greece and Cyprus, and that was kind of very suddenly aborted because of the partition of the island in 1974. And so my dad's hometown, he couldn't go back to his village. That was under Turkish occupation. I think something of the atmosphere of that kind of filtered through. So suddenly, I knew where I was going to stay. I knew that from here on in, Birmingham was definitely my home. And what I remember a lot in my silence is just trying to figure things out. When you don't fit in, not being able to fit in, it can in some ways be a superpower, because you're just observing, you're just figuring out how you can assimilate, the ways in which you can assimilate. So you're just trying to figure out a system. What is the systems that govern this environment, and how can I seamlessly blend into these systems so that I can succeed and thrive and be popular in this environment? I think that's what I did. And a lot of the humor in the book actually comes from failed attempts to integrate and thrive and become popular, and little schemes I had that I thought might be my ticket to legendary status. And more often than not, I just got it wrong.
Yeah. Well, no, but that's what makes the book so compelling, I might say, is because it's so honest. And it's kind of like every child's experience to an extent, but it's writ large, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
But I mean, music is the glue of the book, if you like.
Absolutely. And music is great. It's popular culture, and pop music in particular is really your sort of shorthand. It's your portal into everything, into the way that world is, what's popular at the time. You can, and Top of the Pops, especially Top of the Pops, really to me was like the news. Like the way I watch the news now is the way I used to watch Top of the Pops. Then I could learn everything about the world, about relationships, about what was making people anxious. There were so many songs about war, nuclear war, the impending threat of annihilation, about the awfulness of having to get a proper job in an office. There seemed to be loads of songs, especially in the post-punk era, about that. And of course about love. I felt like I really learned about love and about relationships and about what kind of relationship I wanted to have one day through pop music and through sort of love songs. And and I sort of, and what I wanted to do in the book, and I thought one thing that was an area, if we're talking about humor, which of course we are, I thought a really fertile area of amusement, certainly for myself and hopefully for other people, was to really lean into those songs that just never people never eulogize. You know, you switch on the telly on Friday night on BBC 4, and you see you see one of these talking heads programs where they're sort of, and they're talking about, like, how they saw David Bowie doing Starman for the first time on Top of the Pops, or the way, how exciting it was to see Mick Jagger dancing in the 60s, all these quite cool, or the Pistols, all these like quite cool, significant moments. And I just thought, well, that didn't happen for me at that age. When I was 7, my Starman moment was Brotherhood of Man doing Save Your Kisses for me. So why don't I write about that in that kind of dramatic, declamatory way that people talk about David Bowie and like Mick Ronson putting his arm around his. Why don't we? That's way more fun, And I wanted to sort of write about like the Rubettes doing Sugar Baby Love, which actually, as a song, has so much more kind of heart-stopping drama in it than a million cooler songs. And you could sort of learn. That song tells you more about the human condition, I think, than 99% of the other songs that came out that year. But let's really go for it. Let's really celebrate this stuff to the point where you're reading it and you think, is this guy on glue or something? What is he like? Is he a music journalist? What, I thought music journalists were supposed to be into cool stuff. But of course, if you just set all that aside and just go with it, there's a lot of fun to be had.
I mean, and that's what makes the book so brilliant for me. And it just reminded me of the line in the book where your fantasy was that if your parents left, you would go and live with Brotherhood of Man in their Brotherhood of Mansion, which I just, oh yeah, that's the kind
I was just trying to amuse myself as much as anything, yeah, no, absolutely. And because the thing, yeah, so there's this, I really like the fact, I really believe that moments of sadness or pathos do, and moments of things that are funny are not mutually exclusive. And actually, thank you for picking up on that, because that's a case in point. So the reason I was so obsessed with, I was kind of in my head, I was auditioning bands who might, in some way, like if my parents had decided they'd had enough of my nonsense, my not talking, all my kind of weird little obsessions. I was such a high maintenance child at that point that I really was convinced that they probably were hatching a secret plan to just leave and not take me with them. So I'd watch Top of the Pops and thinking, okay, well, who can look after me, And so, and you're definitely not looking at cool people then. I'm not looking at, I'd see the Stranglers would come on and they'd scare the shit out of me. Like, can you imagine like being like child-minded by the Stranglers? And I mean, they're called the Stranglers, that's a clue, surely.
Yeah.
And whereas, you had like Kiki D doing Don't Go Breaking My Heart with Elton John, and she was kind of dressed in dungarees. She was dressed a little bit like a Play School presenter. And I was just thinking, if Kiki D walked into my parents' fish and chip shop now and said, come with me, I'd diligently, silently walk off with her, thinking she's not going to make, the irony is I probably would talk if she said, like, if she's asked me to open my mouth and say something to her. I thought everything would be great if Kiki did. It's terrible because, like, I love my mum, but like for some reason I just fixated on Olivia Newton-John and I thought Brotherhood of Man would be great as because there's 4 of them, so they could sort of tag team it. Or and ABBA. God, I mean, I just thought I can't imagine.
But you're looking at it. The beauty of it is that you're looking at it through a 7-year-old's eyes, and very few people remember. I mean, I think we have children a similar age, but very few people remember what it was really like. And the great thing about the book is it's so key and honest, and it keys into those things that you go, yes, of course, those were the obsessions. It wasn't like in retrospect you go, yeah,
No.
I mean, I loved, Hunky Dory was,
Oh
I
yeah,
was
no,
there.
that's no
It,
awful. It would be. Who
well,
wants to
no,
read that?
well,
Who wants to read about someone who was impeccably cool at the age of 8? First of all, it's probably a lie, and there's no fun in that. I wouldn't even want to know that kid. I wouldn't. I'd find them a bit insufferable if I was right. Like sometimes you have parents kind of boasting. Even now, you have parents boasting about how their 7-year-old kid is into, I don't know, sort of left field electronica or something. I thought, well, that doesn't sound like any fun.
well, your first record was at the age of 9, The Barren Nights, A Taste of Aggro, was it not?
Yes, yes, and and I say this, I've said this many times, but the Barren Knights for me were my punk, really. They were my Sex Pistols because
That'll be the clip we'll use.
well, that they were because imagine you're sitting there, you're watching them on Top of the Pops, and they've taken these songs by other people and they put new like naughty lyrics to them. And first of all, I thought this was just not allowed. Like if you were like Pink Floyd or Boney M, the people whose songs they'd appropriated, and changed them so that they were about going to see a dentist in Birmingham.
He fits my crown, and as I slept, he
You
filled
fill
my
my mouth
mouth
with
with
iron.
iron. You see, unfortunately, I have the same brain as you that remembers
Mm.
lyrics. But the thing that I don't know, well, you will remember because you've got that brain. But the middle eight is, I think, a bit of comedy genius. Now, all my comedian friends are going to raise their eyebrows at this, but the middle eight goes, rinse out your mouth in the receptacle on the right. And he goes, and then they go, no, on the right.
Yeah, it is great because it's a visual gag. It's quite audacious to put a visual gag on a record. They sort of obviously, if you watch them do it on Top of the Pops, then you got the joke. But they're very confident of them as well to expect that it was so good that it would get them on Top of the Pops, even though they'd only had one hit in the last 10 years or something. So I thought that was incredible, and and another kind of feature of the book is my freakish loyalty towards bands that most people would not really be that loyal to. So once I was in for good, So I became a Barron Knights complete. I carried on buying their records when no one else was buying their records. I'd go to the local record shop and order them, especially, which was kind of a mad thing to do. Looking back now, I'd hear, when they put out their song about Barbara Woodhouse, who was, for people who don't remember, who was a briefly popular dog trainer who was on the television a lot and said sit in a funny way. They put out the sit song. They put out a song called about JR called We Know Who Did It, to coincide with the fact that the kind of mystery around who shot JR in Dallas. And I was in for a penny, in for a pound. I just thought they were just great. And I even went to see them, and I brought with me a kind of huge carrier bag full of all my Barron Knights records in the hope that they might autograph it afterwards, which was, in many ways, one of the most traumatic nights of my childhood. Because my conception of what it must be to be, I thought being in the Barron Knights was 24/7 365 wall-to-wall hilarity every day of the week. They lived it like they sang it. Every day was just hilarious being in the Barron Knights. And so when my parents kindly took me to see them in Cabaret, and then I approached them after the gig, through this kind of fog of cigarette smoke, this kind of and this kind of stink of chicken in a basket, and they just looked bored out of their minds and actually not very happy at the prospect of having to autograph 25 records that I produced from a carrier bag. Then I learned something very important that day.
Well, never meet your heroes.
Yeah, don't form a comedy band that has to sort of survive by playing 260 gigs a year. I think, and their life was poor. Their life was like Groundhog Day. Having to sing "There's a Dentist in Birmingham" every night for like at least 100 nights a year.
Well,
So yeah,
it didn't put me off forming comedy bands. To be honest with you, it encouraged me.
it did. Okay,
Well,
and
no,
so
well, I
what's
had
that?
a band called Morris Minor and the Majors, and we had,
Oh yeah, oh God, yeah, it's you. Amazing.
um,
Wow.
and
Yeah, I got one of your records. What you
oh,
did this, you did
stutter rap,
no,
or this is the
I got
chorus.
this is the chorus. Yeah, yeah, I
A
enjoyed
piss
that.
take of Stockacre and Waterman. Well, by the way,
Did you find out did you ever get a reaction from them?
no,
What did they
no,
think
it
about it?
was. I mean, it was pre-internet times when when you could get reactions from things. We actually did work a lot in the States, and people absolutely loved it. We had a whole career of working all the American clubs like Catch a Rising Star and the comic strip and
Brilliant.
Caroline's. Um, but
This is
I
the
have to
chorus is
say,
a good tune. I mean, this is the chorus. If that occurred to Stockacre Waterman, I don't think they'd put it in the bin. Put it that way. I remember it now. So
oh well, no, no, but they hated it, and they called Radio One to nix it basically. But it was a
well,
big
they
hit in Australia, funnily enough. But it's always the way, isn't it? But it
more
you
for
said
them.
well, well, exactly. Um, but that kind of I was in the book, and there's a quote in the book of something like, "There's nothing beyond my militant belief in the union of music and comedy."
Oh
It,
yes, yes, yeah. No, I was completely on board at that time, and so the Barron Knights had a very sort of special place in my heart. And I mean, I still think it's when it's done well. I think it's massively underrated. Flight of the Concords. I think actually, if we talk about music and comedy, I think Flight of the Concords are the absolute masters at it because they've somehow managed to do it so that it's funny every time. So like no matter how frequently I hear songs like Business Time or Boom or what's the either the Inner City Pressure or Think About It. There's just something in the bones of those songs that's very, very funny, and the kind of the way that the songs are delivered. Yeah, you know what? I mean, okay, maybe I've outgrown the Barron Knights, but I definitely have not outgrown Flight of the Conchords.
yeah, so I mean, there's got to be a space for comedy and music because there always used to be. The first record I bought was Ernie, you know,
Yeah,
which, by the way, is really, really well written.
yeah, absolutely.
The
Yeah. Well, it
lyrics,
got to number one. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
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 I mean, but the lyrics are, now you look at them, you go, that's really clever. It's a
yeah.
beautifully put together. And this, you must have had a fascination and a facility with words from a young age. I mean, was that just um born of a love for hearing clever words to put together, which is what comedy songs are?
I
Or
think you hear it. You hear what I think the thing about English being your second language, which it just about is, because I learned to speak Greek before I learned to speak English, although it was close. Is I think you see the novelty. If you speak two languages anyway, you can sort of see the novelty of another language in a way that you can't quite. Which and certain words and sort of phrases, certain ways of putting words together are sort of intrinsically funny, and that certainly helped with writing this book. You sort of know what details to hang back on, how to sort of trying to make sure that the last words of the last sentence where the has a sort of humorous pay that you'd sort of leave it as late as you can. The later you leave a punchline, the better it is. um yeah, just being fascinated by the way words and language works. I mean, I think weirdly, although they don't write funny songs, I think that one of the things I love about ABBA is that you see that fascination with the novelty of working in a language that isn't their first language.
That's really interesting because I mean, I was brought up until 5 speaking two languages, Hungarian and English at the
Oh
same
wow.
time. So it's, and I'd never even thought about that fact that did the facility and the sounds have more of an effect on you?
Mm.
Because I don't know why I just remembered this, but my brother's 50th birthday party in Budapest, um, I I made a joke in Hungarian that made everybody laugh, and it's still one of my favorite things. You know, when you just it won't be a big thing, but you know, when you make a joke in another language, it's
Of
huge.
course. Oh yeah, yeah. And there would have been things about your delivery of that joke which would have actually been even funnier than you'd intended, because somehow the kind of there would have been things that were unintentionally amusing about the delivery of that joke, just purely because that would have perhaps even added to it,
Well,
because of the fact
it's
that you
really
were saying
interesting
it.
because I mean I can still remember it today. Now you and I have that same weird facility with language whereby we it just sticks with us. But
Mm,
he had a second big bit of cake for his birthday, and he'd always been renowned as, you know, liking sweet things and cakes. And there's an affectionate term in Hungarian which is kismalac, which means little pig and everything. And somebody sweetly said, "Oh, kismalac," and I went, "Nem kismalac, nagymalac," which is means not a little pig, a big pig, you know. But it was something about, and everybody fell apart.
it works. It works also because there's just something intrinsically phonetically funny about that word, that phrase, which so it sort of works twice over. You were
Yeah.
right to zone in on it. Your comedy instinct did not fail you.
Well, no, no, that was a beautiful thing. We were talking about the way you got into well, I in the introduction I said about that you wrote a fanzine and then Melody Maker picked it up. I've got a bone to pick with you actually, going back to Morris Minor and the Majors. It's not your fault, but it's Melody Maker's fault. The funniest review Morris
Mm,
Minor and the Majors ever got was probably somebody who'd seen Spinal Tap, and
mm.
it was a 2-word review, and it just said Morris Minor and the Majors stutter rap colon utter crap.
Was that a melody maker? Was
It
it?
was in Melody Maker.
Mm. It's not subtle,
Sounds
is it?
more NME, doesn't it? Really, but
Yeah, it's not. It's not the most subtle of, But that writer might have been having a bit of an off day. But anyway, never mind.
oh, I just thought it was a little tip to the Spinal Tap, where, you know, shark sandwich, shit sandwich.
Oh right, okay, yeah. I think
I thought it was in and clever, which is why I actually kind of liked it, to be honest with
you're
you.
kind of maybe flattering them. I'm not
Yeah,
sure that was the case.
maybe it was just rhyming. Yeah, it could have been. So, um, talk about that, how that, because the book stops far too early for me, Broken Greek, and you need to write a sequel because I want to know where that boy went and how he got into Melody Maker. Tell us a bit about that, and if humor was inherent in getting that job.
Of course, everyone in their early 20s thinks they're funny. I'm not sure how funny I was really. All the funny stuff in my fanzine was written by myself and my friend, who in the book I call William. That's not really his real name. Um, and he was actually much funnier than me. All the really funny stuff was written by him, and I was sort of slightly trying to copy him. So I was slightly adrift without him. Because he didn't really like a lot of the music that I liked. So, the music journalism stuff I did, that was very much me kind of plotting my own path. Um, I don't really look back on that. I think I was still learning at that point. I was still sort of trying to figure out, to be honest, my writing only, if I did stuff that was funny, I think it only really got funny when I became a bit more comfortable in my own skin and kind of wasn't trying to impress an imaginary peer group in my head, which I think was probably what I was trying to do a lot of the time in my 20s. I only sort of really relaxed into something that was kind of more honest representation of who I am in my mid-30s. I think having kids helped, definitely. You sort of drop the artifice a little bit when you become a parent, and you're well on your way to losing all kind of notions of being cool. And so yeah, I just learned to be a bit more honest and in my writing. I think that made my writing better. And on the occasions when, and the good thing about the book, writing the book, was that because I learned to be honest, I could jettison any sort of retrospective sense of shame or embarrassment about my grand plans to be kind of popular or cool. And and accept, which is what I long since have done, that I'm just not one of life's natural alpha males. A huge thing for me actually was, again, I realized so many things when I was writing the book. You know, you look back and you think, oh God, yeah, that's because of that, and that's, you know. So I was obsessed with Charlie Brown and Peanuts, the Peanuts cartoon strip, when I was in my infancy, and I really believe that the line between where I ended and Charlie Brown began became completely confused in my head. So this sort of fatalism that you have that makes Peanuts such a beautiful strip was completely sort of soaked into me, and it started to affect my behavior in other realms. I decided to support Manchester United at a time in their history when they weren't doing very well at all. They were kind of slightly lost. They were trying to live up to the kind of glory days of their Matt Busby years. And this was pre-Alex Ferguson. So they were somewhat adrift. And but because I just found out it was the 20th anniversary of the Munich air disaster, or when I started supporting them, and I supported them because I felt sorry for them, and the fact that they were underachieving, I felt more comfortable around an underachieving team than I would have done around a sort of truly successful team. And my favourite players, my favourite footballer was not Trevor Francis, it was not Kevin Keegan or Kenny Dalglish. It was this sort of slightly journeyman centre forward called Jimmy Greenhoff, who no one else remembered. Who on earth would have Jimmy Greenhoff as their favourite player? I mean, you know, this was a team with Steve Coppell and Stuart Pearson in it, Frank Stapleton. What would possess you to love Jimmy Greenhoff? But I think in him I saw, you know, Charlie Brown's favourite sport. Charlie Brown was obsessed with American football and baseball, and Charlie Brown's favourite sports person was I think a baseball player called Joe Schlabotnik.
That's right.
Who was so hapless that he in the end wasn't even able to sustain a full-time career as a baseball player, and had to get a job as a petrol pump attendant, and then as part of, and then all the other characters in Charlie Brown finally realizing just how much he'd done as like the manager of because Charlie Brown was the captain of his eternally underachieving baseball team. And so Linus and Lucy and everyone else, they all pulled together, Peppermint Patty, they all pulled together and arranged for Charlie Brown to have this testimonial dinner that they would arrange for Joe Schlabotnik to come to attend. And Charlie Brown puts his best suit and tie on, and of course Joe Schlabotnik sort of has to do overtime as his petrol pump attendant work or something, and as a result doesn't make it, which is of course the most Charlie Brown thing that could happen to Charlie Brown on his big day.
But you're seeing the irony there as well, isn't it? And or I mean, is it just you're drawn to it on that level, or is there also, are you seeing the underlying irony of life? I mean, am I reading too much into that?
I wasn't able to analyze it in that way, but time and time again, I just sort of felt the subplots of the life that happened around me, the ones that seemed to stay with me were ones where the ones where that were just kind of drenched with bathos. I like Gary Birtles moving from Nottingham Forest to Manchester United, and then having an entire season where we barely scored a single goal. That just somehow, those are the things I remember. Those are the things that I thought would happen to me if I if I became a footballer and I had this amazing season where I didn't really analyze too much the kind of the ins and outs of my game, and then suddenly I kind of got the fear. And was loaded with all these expectations that were placed upon me. I'd fall to bits. I'm still like that now. If any situation where there are great expectations heaped upon me, I absolutely, I have to work so hard to not completely shit it up. It's and it affects everything I do. It affects, like, if I'm lost and I stop and ask someone for directions, then within 10 seconds of them starting to tell me what I need to do to kind of get to my destination, the voice in my head starts going, "You're not listening, are you? You've already forgotten, haven't you? You're just going to have to sit there and nod until that person finishes telling you where to go, and then you're going to drive off, and you fucked it. You don't know anything at all. You've not listened. You failed. You did this as a complete waste of time." And that's that's sadly what it's like in my head.
If this were a therapy session, which is not, but one of the things that you can do is just change the tone of the voice in your head. Because one of the things that always happens when people have that negative voice, and by the way, everybody has negative voice to an extent, but it's what you do with it. If you took that negative voice and you're in charge of that negative voice, I'm hoping, because if you're not, then we're in real trouble. But if you're in charge of that, you can change it into any voice in your head. You could change it into a Mickey Mouse voice. And you go, "Oh, you're not listening at all, are you?" And that would make you laugh, like you just did. But or you could, you can change it into a sexy voice if you like. It doesn't matter. But actually, psychology now tells us it's more to do with the tone of the voice. That if you go, "Oh, you fucked up again. Oh, it's typical of you, isn't it?" And people get this, and it's usually a parent or a grandparent's voice that or a teacher's voice that actually invades them, and they talk to themselves. If you had somebody who talked to you like that in real life, you'd get really pissed off, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah.
The question is, of course, why do you allow yourself to talk to yourself in such a negative way?
It's probably to do with guilt, but that's fine because I sort all the guilt that's kind of talked about in the book. In a way, it's like the bedrock of my sense of humor. So I just need to marshal it a little bit better. But so much of my sense of humor is, I love bathos is probably my favorite word because I just love finding myself in situations that are a little bit disappointing and anticlimactic in a kind of funny way. That I almost live for those moments in a way, because I think those are the moments where where the real truth of life happens. And so it was great, certainly in the book. And I think that's why I remembered so many of them for the book. Where you just sort of like where the kind of chasm between what you hope to achieve with a particular undertaking just falls so disastrously short in the final, and ultimately what are the gains. There's a bit in the book where I've noticed that a lot of boys in my class are they've got these quite cool sort of bags, and they're starting these little kind of canvas kind of bags, they're rucksacks, and a little bit like kind of like army surplus like bags. And the Vogue thing to do, the sort of cool thing to do, is to write the logos of the bands that you love on them. But of course, the boys that were doing it were into all kind of cool bands like the Jam and Madness and the Specials and the Clash. First of all, there was no point in me trying to do this because I had a different bag. I had this big clunky kind of Adidas Holdall bag, but I hadn't figured that out. I hadn't figured out that no one else is writing kind of band names on Adidas Holdalls. That's just not a cool look to achieve. And of those that did, they definitely weren't writing them with a kind of silver metallic marker, which is what I was about to do. And and if they did, the names of the bands that they were writing were definitely not the Bee Gees and the Police and Racy. And
Racy.
ABBA, and and my latest kind of obsession, who was Dave Edmunds, who I guess a lot of people will remember for certainly in the late 70s. He had hits with Girls Talk and the Queen of Hearts, which were my current like two of my current favorites.
Love it.
And I'd left a bit too much. I got that, when you start replicating a logo and you realize that it's going to be much bigger than you expected it to be, but you can't. You've decided on your lettering size, and you have to persist because it's an unerasable silver marker. So I started writing Dave Edmunds, and actually it was massive. It took up about a quarter of the space on the front of my holdall, and my brother, who's kind of gazing on, who's just completely lost all hope in me. I'm just this complete embarrassment, and he just gazes down at this bag, which looks like ridiculous. And he goes, "Do you know what that looks like?" I said, "No." What's it? It looks like that bag belongs to someone called Dave Edmunds. Someone called Dave Edmunds, who's into a load of really shit bands. And of course, I sort of knew he was right, but of course, I'd done it now. So the following morning, I had to get up and go to school with this ridiculous bag with these ridiculous logos of names of bands that everyone was just going to sort of beat me up for being so public in my affection for. So, bathos, wherever it comes, I live for bathos.
I love that story, by the way. It just it encapsulates that childhood thing of trying to be cool and just getting it wrong. Just
repeatedly.
Madness mentioned many times in the book, because when you go to secondary school, of course, baggy trousers comes out at the same.
Literally the week I started secondary school. Yeah. I mean, it was like an instructional song. It was
lots of girls, lots of boys, lots of guys, and lots of noise or whatever.
It was complete. It was a handy product. It was as if I'd been conscripted on the week that Status Quo put out in the army now. It was just a list of things telling me what to expect.
Well, funny enough, Bedders and I are mates, and we often talk about actually the tight bond between comedians and musicians. Well, musicians want to be comedians, and comedians want to be musicians.
Well, you're both sort of writing your own material. I mean, I often think about the slight envy that actors have for musicians, because they're sort of delivering someone else's material most of the time, at any rate. But I guess there's a lot more that unites musicians and comedians than separates them, and they have to plan. I think the way you plan the undulations of your set are probably quite similar, whether or not you're a comedian or a musician. You have to sort of bring the audience up at the beginning, and then but not exhaust them, so that not make them laugh too much, so that like they're just knackered by the last 20 minutes of your show. I imagine all these things sort of come into play, and I know talking to a lot of musicians that again you're sort of navigating these peaks and troughs. I mean, I think Paul McCartney's Glastonbury set a couple of years ago is a really good example of a set where you just could not play bangers for 3 hours straight. You would just exhaust everyone. There would be no, you almost have to take away some of the excitement at some point so that people can really kind of slam into it with renewed vigor, in the final 20 minutes of the set or whatever. I imagine, I don't know, you tell me.
We were talking about this, and the rhythm of a show. He was on the show, and he's a mate as well, Milton Jones. And he said, if you do a whole sort of hour and 20 minute show, they can't take all that in. You're going to have different bits that give them a chance to rest. I used to, obviously, Morris Minor Majors, you know about, but I used to do a double act with Ainsley Harriott called the Calypso Twins. And once we were at the store and Robin Williams came in wanting to do a set. And so he used to do it quite a lot, to be fair. And he came on and he goes, I just want to do 5 to keep it, my hand in everything. He went on and did 40 minutes. Wow. And we had to go on after him. And he was brilliant, but he'd sucked the life out of the room. It was just, there's only so much you can take. What I've been thinking is this all leads to, would you not have loved to be the pop star? Well, okay, so explain some of that, because is it funnier?
I think I would have taken it maybe in my early 20s, and actually in a funny kind of way. In my first years of being a music journalist, when I first started reviewing records, sometimes I was a bit unkind about records that I didn't like. And one of the ways I justified that to myself was that, well, what they care what someone like me thinks about them. They're having just the best time. They're living the dream. They're musicians. They're being paid to play music. If I was them, I wouldn't care what some, poxy student, has got to say about, if they don't like them. How could that possibly be the water off a duck's back to them? But of course, it's no one wants to read harsh words about themselves. But at the time, so I think at the time, without even realizing it, maybe I was a bit jealous. Maybe I was a little bit, like if I had their job, a job as brilliant and amazing as that, then nothing could touch me. No amount of negativity could really get to me. And I know I wouldn't last a month now. I realized that fairly quickly. I remember going out to Los Angeles in my first sort of proper trip abroad, beyond Europe, to interview Melody Maker. To interview Radiohead for Melody Maker, and they were just having their first big hit, Creep, break in America, and it was being played all over K-Rock, all over the radio in Los Angeles. And when you got playlisted in K-Rock, basically it sets off a wave that goes right across from like west to east, and you have a hit single. That's kind of where it starts. And they had to do like 3 straight days of promo, 8 o'clock to midnight every day. And just talking about this one song, they were kind of like just being a human jukebox. And in that moment, I just thought, I just don't have the stomach for this. I mean, it's stressful enough just watching them do it, let alone being part of it. And no, after that, I was, God, not being able to get back to your own bed for like 6 months, and that's before you've even got a family, and then you have a family, and God, it's no way. No, I'm very, very happy, and have been for a long time, very happy doing what I'm doing.
Did you run into people who you had, let's just say, cruelly reviewed in your youth and have to justify it? I mean, have you got any Spinal Tap moments from?
I've apologized to people. And it's completely fine. I mean, there's someone from the Blue Nile. There was like a moment in which is ridiculous actually, because I actually liked the Blue Nile, but there was just like a moment where I thought I was being iconoclastic. I thought it had become a bit of a cliche. They used to get these kind of hyperbolic reviews, and so I just sort of I wrote a piece about them sometime in the mid-90s that just sort of slagged them off. Really, I don't think I even believed it at the time. I don't even know why I did it. And then one of them popped up on Twitter and was like, "Aren't you that guy?" Blah blah blah. And I said, "Yeah, I am, and I'm really sorry." And to be honest, probably there hasn't been like a few months where I don't go by and think of, everything I've done like that, every misjudged or, overly, disproportionately unfair word I've written about a band that I've much later come to realize would have been quite hurtful to them. And I think about, never, that's the thing about, and I write about this in the book, the the unkind things that you do in life, they sort of stay with you forever. They don't go away. You sort of carry them with you. It's like a dead weight that you carry around with you. And so I sort of welcomed that opportunity. Certainly in that particular instance, I sort of welcomed that opportunity to say, yeah, I was a complete dick. I was trying to be a legend. I was trying to impress a kind of imaginary peer, not just an imaginary peer group, but actually partly an actual peer group of senior writers at the magazine where I worked, and other magazines as well. A kind of bunch of alphas in my head who really weren't worth impressing, and they wouldn't have been impressed anyway. So what was I even trying to achieve? Anyway, he graciously accepted my heartfelt apology.
Well, I mean, there is a theory that it's easier, and I'm not saying this is true. I'm just asking, is it true? It's easier to write a bad review than it is to write a good one. Is that something you ascribe to?
It's easier. It's easier to write a really clumsy bad review than it is to write a good one. I sort of think that you have to be really, really, really good at really, really sharp, have a real sort of really be on the money, have a real awareness of what cliches to avoid, and wield quite a light touch, actually, if you're really going to write something negative about someone and really make it hit home. I read really badly written hatchet jobs all the time, but you rarely come across a good one. And and even the good ones, they don't often date that well. And the Q magazine used to have a monthly sort of hatchet job slot called "Who the Hell Does So and So Think They Are," where the former Smash Hits journalist Tom Hibbert, who then went on to do this thing in Q, would sort of interview a well-known musician who the implication was that they'd got a bit up themselves, a bit above themselves, and they'd sort of he'd kind of he'd essentially he'd sort of ask them questions where they sort of tripped themselves up, they made themselves look a bit silly, they were kind of hobbled by their own hubris. And even now, I mean, an anthology of those articles came out last year. It was very well received. And so, sure, a lot of them were funny. But I just sort of think, well, what did they ultimately do? They wrote some songs. They wanted to make a beautiful thing. And in almost all cases where people try and make music, they don't start in order to become millionaires. They might do along the way, but they're just trying to fill an empty space with something that they can say, look, I sort of did that, and then play it back and just be amazed by the magic of being able to create something where once nothing existed. And yeah, they might take too many drugs or they might become a bit disconnected from reality. But in a way, that's a sacrifice. That's a sacrifice that you've sort of made in order to honor that initial impulse to just make something sort of beautiful. And I don't know, I sort of struggle with those sort of hatchet jobs now.
Yeah, no, I just wondered because if it's, I mean, it goes back to the poem "The Critic," doesn't it? Really, that the person who gets out and does it is the hero in this, rather because they're trying their best. It's quite easy to just sit by and sneer, but then should you let everything pass by and just go, it's all good? That doesn't help either.
Do that. And there's certainly, I think maybe there's a place for there's definitely a place for negativity in, or rigorous criticism in book reviews because they take a lot of time to read, and you can't. It's not like with music where you can just stream the thing now and not pay a penny for it before you decide whether or not you like it. Whereas with films, there's more of a case for having negative film reviews and negative book reviews and negative theatre reviews, because you're potentially saving someone the bother of wasting their money, wasting a night out, all of that stuff. I get that completely. But with music reviews, I think that's different. I think I don't. In most cases, I don't see the point of giving a record a negative review when you could just ignore it. Because what most people are looking for now, they're looking. There's more good stuff than you have time to listen to. So what they're really looking for is someone who might help them with that sifting process and direct them to the stuff that might be their next favorite record. If it's shit, like I get loads of shit music that I think is shit, I just don't write about it. I'm not going to ruin someone's day by saying, you know, by writing a paragraph about a record by someone who, if they're lucky, might sell 2,000 copies of their album, which they probably made by having a part-time job in a kitchen.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Yeah. Well, it's yeah. I agree. I think it's it's a necessary thing to have, but it can get bitter and twisted, can't it? It's like
life's too short. Life's too short.
What's how many critics does it take to change a light bulb, isn't it? One to change the light, 10, one to change the light bulb, and 9 to go, that should have been me up there. But it is. I mean, we talked a little bit about the negative side of things. I want to talk a bit about, you literally have spent your life around so-called special talented people. What is that special sauce that makes successful people? And is humour important in that mix?
I think humour is hugely underrated. I don't understand why it's so hard for funny films to win Oscars when, or when it's, with a really good funny film, you get all the stuff that you get in a really good film, plus humour. It's like, you get like 33% extra. I always think of humour as intelligence to spare or cleverness to spare. So you've got all the other stuff, a lot of especially with a lot of the funniest people I know, it's just like they do all the stuff that you would expect and hope that human beings would, but with the kind of spare brain power they've got left over, it just goes into being funny. That's how I think of my funny mates. I just sort of see it's just a sort of game they're playing to amuse themselves and also other people. I think that's how I see humour.
I love the idea of that humour is intelligence to spare. So does that therefore make humour a superpower?
In a way, I mean, I sort of think that I just don't understand why it's sometimes seen as a handicap or a weakness, or like, or if like when a comedian accepts their first serious role and they get loads of great reviews because they're finally they're finally revealing it, like it's somehow an evolution from being funny. How can being serious be an evolution from being funny? Because you sort of, again, it's like being serious is being a person is the same, but like having this really good bit that makes everyone happy subtracted from it.
But in your book and throughout it, I think the humour is wonderful and essential. And it's interesting that you thought, I have to do this because there are some disturbing parts of the book.
Well, also, no one knows who I am in the general. I mean, you know who I am. That's really nice. Thank you. But I sort of like, if you're going to pick up a book by someone you've never heard of, then it's kind of good manners to try and make them laugh along the way, because otherwise, what's the point?
So, do you feel that you can be a great communicator without having that level of humor or element of humor?
You can be, and I've definitely been in the room with great communicators who haven't necessarily had recourse to humor. I'm thinking about, there's a particular lecturer at university, a philosopher lecturer, who was just kind of like, his lectures were just like the best TED talk ever, but the one thing they didn't have much of was humor. So it is possible, but I think if you can put humor in there, then I think you have to pedal twice as hard if if you haven't got recourse to jokes, if you haven't got the funnies, the lines to really sort of keep people on side by laughing.
Well, it's interesting. We had Dr. Richard Bandler on the show who said humor is a tool to unlock the mind and change reality. And I thought that's a really nice way to say it.
So I've just remembered a joke that I heard a few weeks ago. What's the worst thing that Willie Nelson can say to you after you've just given him a blowjob?
I don't know. What is the worst thing that Willie Nelson can say to you after you've just given him a blowjob?
I'm not Willie Nelson.
It's a good gag.
Well,
Yeah, no, it's a great gag.
So that might be the darkest joke I know. Anyway.
Well, we all love a dark joke, but it's brilliant.
That I don't think that was answered your question. That just came belatedly into my head.
That's all right. We love going off on tangents on the Humourology podcast. Unfortunately, we've reached the time where we've got only time for the quick fire questions.
Oh, okay, yeah, great, fine. I'm ready.
Ready, fingers on buzzers.
Quick fire questions.
Who's the funniest business person that you met?
My wife and I guess we run our business because we sort of manage our affairs together, and my wife is the funniest person I know. So can I nominate her?
Well, you can, but you better tell her name for the tape, because otherwise.
So my wife is a writer, Caitlin Moran, who has written many books and is a columnist and writer for the Times. So yeah, she's the funniest person and she's technically a business person.
Yeah, no, she is, and you've just saved your marriage as well at the same time.
I hope so.
What book makes you laugh?
One of the reasons why it's almost redundant to write a follow-up to Broken Greek is because it would encroach so heavily into the diary of Adrian Mole, the secret diary of Adrian Mole territory, that it's almost redundant to do it, because that was definitely there's definitely a lot of that in what happened to me in the ensuing years. But that's still, I mean, you pick that up and it's amazing for a book that was written over 40 years ago to be as funny now as it was then. And that really is. I love Marina Hyde. What Marina Hyde, who writes for The Guardian, who writes these just unbelievable, who is able to kind of, and has consistently, especially over the last the last few years of the Conservative government, being able to mask her fury at their fecklessness and egregiousness with just a consistent stream of just top class comedy material. So I would also put Marina Hyde's anthology of Guardian commentary pieces, What Just Happened, in there. I think she's just phenomenal.
What film makes you laugh, Pete?
I mean, Elf. Elf is still just, the most watched film. I haven't watched any film as much as Elf. So definitely, I think that's probably has to be number one.
I'm going to take a shift to the other side of the questions. What's not funny?
Obvious targets are not funny. People the least funny thing you can ever do is make any variation on the joke that Ringo wasn't even the best drummer in the Beatles. I think if you want people to know that you're a complete halfwit and that rather than think of jokes, then you just kind of take crap off the peg observations made by other morons, then that's the surest and fastest way to do it. Anyone who makes a joke about how Jules Holland ruins everything with his boogie boogie piano playing is also, in almost all instances, I believe, a liar. They just heard someone else say it and they think it's a kind of cool musical opinion to have. Whereas the truth of the matter is, if you walked into a room or if you went to a party and Jules Holland was there and he suddenly started playing boogie boogie piano, you would not leave that party. You would not be disappointed in any way. You would be really excited, and you would even hope that maybe he would play a couple of songs so that you could join everyone in singing along to it. And also, the flurry of posts I see on social media where every time his Hootenanny is on and they say, oh God, it's that bloody Jules Holland again ruining New Year's Eve with his Hootenanny. I don't believe them. I don't believe they really believe that opinion. And and also, at least he did something. At least he kind of put together a plan to do something exciting on New Year's Eve, whereas what you do, you're just sitting in your house watching Jules Holland and complaining about it. Well, I know which camp I'm in, so that's what's not funny.
Okay, that was a wonderful, beautifully put together tirade against.
It was a cri de coeur. That's what it was.
It was. So, what word makes you laugh, Pete?
The word that makes me laugh is Harold's, because that's what my mum thinks that the famous department store in Knightsbridge is called, and I don't want to correct her because I just love it too much. I love that she thinks it's called Harold's.
That's so sweet. Would you rather be considered clever or funny?
Funny, and I hope really that there's not much difference, because I don't think unless you're accidentally funny, for completely incidental reasons, I think in almost all cases you can't be funny and not be clever.
I completely agree.
Before, I honestly think being funny is having cleverness to spare. It's what you do with your spare cleverness.
Oh, I completely agree. I think that's it. And finally, Pete, desert island gags. If you can only take one joke with you to a desert island, what would it be?
Well, you probably know it, but you'll have to. You have to help me here. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Interrupting cow.
Interrupting cow. It's a lovely antithesis of everything you've said about the cleverness and that humour is about intelligence to spare.
Right.
You've been a brilliant guest.
I've hobbled myself. Sorry.
No, you've been an absolute brilliant guest with brilliance and bathos. And I thank you for being on the Humourology podcast.
Paul, I'm honestly so surprised and flattered that you asked me, especially given the roll call of previous guests that you've had. And I'm delighted to provide this strange aberration. But thank you very much. I'm really honoured to be on it. Thank you.
The Humourology podcast was hosted by Paul Barros, produced by David Rose, music by Steve Hayworth, creative direction by Les Hughes, and additional research by Helen Sykes. Please remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This has been a Big Sky production.